Perfect. Thank you so much. And thanks so much for everybody joining in on this presentation today. It's certainly a topic that I'm deeply passionate about and have been for a long time. I want to start by thanking Walden University as well for giving me this opportunity. I am in the proposal phase of my research, as you'll be able to tell through the presentation. So I really appreciate the opportunity at this stage to be able to start to speak about it. And I also want to do a shout out and thanks to my chair, Dr. Stephanie Hoon, who's been so supportive and really critical throughout this research. Again, I'm at the proposal stage and I've already conducted a significant amount of literature review. And really this topic and this timing has been incredibly poignant for me in terms of give you a little bit of brief history. I left my full-time job a little over 7 years ago in order to really start my own company, but in doing so, doing a significant amount of research on why is it that organizations are having a hard time closing the gender gap. And in doing that research over a number of years, but not in an academic setting, that I was able to really develop and identify some of these factors. And so, the timing of completing and working on my PhD and COVID coming in and really the advent of the hybrid workplace worked out quite well in terms of being able to then see a complete shift. Really what a lot of studies are saying is that this is not just a brief change in the workplace, but that it's actually a once in a generation. Those are the types of words that are being used, a once in a generation, even social experiment. And before getting into the presentation, the one thing I'll talk about is just the hybrid workplace from the perspective of when I refer to hybrid, I'm talking about the idea that businesses are now not just operating in purely remote or purely in office, but in fact, they're embracing this hybrid model. And it's different for every organization where they're balancing working from home, working from the office, and really working from anywhere. So maybe we can move to the next slide. So starting with the problem statement and really looking at what is the problem that I'm attempting to try and gain some new knowledge in and really help to increase the awareness of, is really starting to look at the COVID-19 pandemic really accelerated the adoption of a new normal. And in the beginning stages of COVID, as many people will be aware of, that there was an immediate, particularly for non-essential knowledge workers, that there was an adoption of a purely remote workplace where every organization, for health reasons, and in order in even, certainly in Canada, and I know to a certain extent in the US as well, by law, we're forced to work remotely. And this is this social experiment that a lot of scholars started to really reach at, because there'd always been a point in time where organizations had begun to explore working remotely, but not to this scale. And so this social experiment was taking place where organizations that were forced to work remotely and really identify now and work out not only the technology, the communication, but really what was, from a leadership perspective, what is that going to look like? And the study that I'm working on is then looking at, yes, there's always been, even pre-COVID, some concerns and issues and with the gender gap, in many cases not closing, but in fact widening. And so, my perspective was looking at, well, based on this pandemic and based on the transition to a new hybrid workplace, how, and based on some of the research that is starting to come out from some seminal theorists about the fact that the COVID pandemic has actually, and the transition to purely remote and to some of these hybrid models has started to already demonstrate that women and female leaders have been disproportionately affected. What is that going to mean for the future? And so the specific research problem that I wanted to understand was, what are the challenges and opportunities for female leaders that must navigate this transition from an in-office workplace to a new hybrid model? And then also, what are the potential benefits to adopting a situational leadership style in this new hybrid model? And really identified a gap in knowledge where it came to that this is such a new approach, particularly at this scale, that leaders, and some of the research is already coming out, that leaders were unaware of what leadership style to effectively use in this new hybrid workplace. So maybe we'll go to the next slide now. So the purpose of this phenomenology qualitative study is really to explore the lived experience. I wanted to understand, what is it from the female leader's perspective, but based on their experiences of transitioning from an in-office workplace environment to a hybrid model. What is it that they're experiencing? What are the new challenges that are coming up? And certainly based on some of the early research, and particularly if you recall at the time of COVID, when some of the lockdowns were taking place, that the lockdown was not just for work, it was also for schools. And so some of the early research was coming out showing that female leaders were having to take on not just adapting to leading teams in a new remote workplace, but then also having to balance this new work-life structure where they were also in many cases homeschooling and had other responsibilities. And the research was showing that women were disproportionately affected based on that, based on also in terms of career advancement, and also in terms of women that were disproportionately even let go and at certain times based on COVID and based on the new operating structures. So taking a look at the two research questions that I really wanted to focus in on in this study, number one was really trying to understand what the female lived experience is, identifying new challenges, opportunities, and really enablers that will help them and that they must navigate. And so in terms of, new challenges and, really trying to understand how this new operating model is going to change not only how they grow career-wise, but also how they effectively lead teams and also opportunities, because although there was some negative side, there was also a significant number of opportunities for women where they were given more freedom and flexibility. And certainly the operating models are changing so that there's some great opportunities for female leaders to advance, and hopefully that will positively impact the gender equality in the workplace. The second question I wanted to look at, because I felt that based on all the research, there's a significant gap in knowledge and understanding what will be the long-term leadership style that's required as more of these organizations and high-profile organizations are choosing to adapt and adopt a new hybrid model. So, what is the leadership style? And more specifically, and as I'll get into it more when I go into the conceptual framework, what benefits female leaders will be able to obtain by adopting a situational leadership style. when I was looking at the significance of the study, really it's helping to narrow that knowledge gap, because we are creating a new normal in organizations. So from that perspective, there's a significant gap. There's always been gender equality concerns and issues in organizations, and trying to be able to understand what is it that's going to be required today and going into the future to close that gap, and also increase overall diversity in organization, as well as, from when you get closer into understanding the leadership, and how do organizations continue to thrive, maintain their corporate culture, and in the setting where some employees are working from home, some are working in office. This is a whole new operating model, and there's certainly, based on research so far, there's not one perfect way for every organization. So, there's so much to this. And so I had to really try and narrow down the study, but certainly in the future, there's significant opportunities for future research. Taking a look at the conceptual framework, I had a lot of fun working on that, because I felt like there's really three key areas that comprise the conceptual framework that will help to really shed light on answering these two primary research questions. The first starts with exploring the concept of labyrinth of leadership. And labyrinth of leadership was a theory, or really a concept, that was created by two seminal theorists and professors. They published a book called Through the Labyrinth, and that really inspired me, from the early days of researching gender equality. Their idea and their concept was that we have no longer the ability to just describe gender equality from the perspective of using the glass ceiling as a metaphor, that we need to go beyond that, because women leaders have advanced beyond to senior leadership positions. We've broken through the glass ceiling. However, there's a more complex labyrinth that we must navigate. And the labyrinth is different for every individual, for every female, and truly for every person. And the barriers are different for each. And so by looking at that perspective, I thought it was very interesting and provided so many opportunities for widening it, because the labyrinth has now, and the barriers that have to be navigated are so much different now that we're really going into this new normal of the embracing a hybrid workplace. And so what are some of the barriers and challenges and opportunities that female leaders have to navigate as they transition from an in-person workplace environment, leading a team, to now a purely hybrid? And so that, I felt like that provided such a great framework for being able to look at all of the literature and the research, as well as embracing it in my interviews, and being able to identify that and build off of existing research and knowledge that's there. The concept of the new hybrid workplace model, which is the second area of focus, is a little bit more difficult because it's so new. And so I'm still conducting my literature review and trying to understand and identify different models. And what's really interesting is that there's a lot of scholarly research, peer-reviewed research that's coming out in the last 2 years about the new hybrid workplace. More specifically too about remote. In the past, that there's been a lot of research that we can really draw on. There's not necessarily one true model that has really emerged, but in terms of really taking a look at and being able to learn from different models and structures, really a lot of the research is coming out of industry. And this is where I find it so interesting that this study is really a great example of, a scholar practitioner opportunity, because, organizations like Deloitte and Microsoft and all of these organizations are greatly affected by this new normal, this new hybrid workplace, and their leaders, and so they're publishing so much research and knowledge. So I've been focusing initially on obviously the peer-reviewed research, but I'm also expanding and looking at industry-driven leadership research on that related to hybrid, related to female leaders in the workplace as well. And then taking a look at leadership, and again, there's so much that there in terms of how do you lead in a hybrid workplace. Some of the theories that I initially started to look at and am going to still continue to research, but were theories such as e-leadership theory, and that does exist. It still requires a lot of development and growth, and certainly it existed pre-COVID, and I think that there's a lot of room for that evolving, and I'm including a lot of research on that as well. But what felt like more appropriate to be able to explore and understand the specific leadership style that's going to be required for this new hybrid workplace is situational leadership, because it was developed with the idea and the belief that there is no one single right way of leading, and that your leadership style needs to adapt to your current situation, and it also needs to adapt to your followers and where they are. And so I'm going to be exploring that in more depth in terms of what does that then mean for a hybrid workplace, because you may have one hybrid workplace that is structured a certain way, and you're going to have others that are structured a completely different way. And so there may not necessarily be one leadership theory that works perfectly. And so I'm going to be trying to take a closer look at what are the benefits then of adapting and applying a situational leadership style, specifically for female leaders, trying to really narrow the study down and try and understand if that will present opportunities for, again, going back to the labyrinth, for female leaders navigating this new structure. Next slide, please. So there's a lot of relevant scholarship and research out there, and it's really exciting because there's a study that I just read today, how they really speak to the idea that we need to be really careful to not embrace the temptation to just return to pre-pandemic approaches, and that this really presents an opportunity to create a new normal, to really create an operating structure and a workplace environment that will help increase equality, and that will really create an environment where all employees thrive, that organizations are able to be innovative and to really grow. So I've done a significant amount of research on the impact, starting on the impact of COVID on female leaders, and trying to understand what the impact has been. There's a lot of research that's coming out that's showing that there has been a more negative impact on female leaders. They all do address that there has also been positives. And I feel like, a lot of the research that initially came out, there was a lot more negatives in the sense that organizations were quickly trying to figure out how to adapt to this new normal. And certainly the schools were closed at that time, and there was a lot more pressures. Whereas I think that if you read research that's now coming out in 2021, 2022, when some of those restrictions have have really lifted a little bit, that and organizations have had the opportunity to adapt, that you're seeing more benefits emerge for female leaders, and in terms of them being able to, where maybe there was restrictions in them advancing their career and leading teams on an international scale because there was a lot more travel, for example. There's some studies that are saying that, whereas now there's flexibility, that organizations of the new normal is to work remotely, and that's allowing them to make new changes to their career because they're not worried so much about having to be away from their families and things like that. So that's been really amazing. To take a look at too the hybrid model, it's so interesting to see how organizations are interpreting what this new hybrid model looks like, and really looking at research in terms of, the lived experiences. A lot of studies are coming out that are talking about some of the challenges, some of the opportunities, but also really this reinvention of work, and having this opportunity to take a look at how we work and what we'd like to see different in the future. It's really reimagining, as some people say, re-improving and reinventing, as some scholars are really talking about. So, in terms of being able to look at, latest studies, it's very encouraging to see that there's a lot of research that is coming out. And so that's been helping a lot, and from different perspectives in different industries. And a lot of my research has been focused in on the knowledge workers and organizations, because they have a more complexity to be able to adapt to a hybrid workplace. We'll go to the next slide. So in terms of procedures and really taking a look at how the study will be conducted, because I'm still in the proposal stage, I'm going to be taking a look closer at the lived experience of female leaders in North America, leading knowledge workers who have transitioned again from leading in an in-office environment to a new hybrid model. And I'm going to be looking at companies and organizations that have publicly committed to hybrid. So, and there's quite a few of them what I'm seeing based on the research is that a lot of them are committing to hybrid because not only does it make sense from an operational perspective, but that there's actually a huge demand for from employees' perspective. And in fact, organizations that are choosing not to embrace a hybrid model and that are forcing employees to return to the office, they're seeing a higher level of employees leaving the organization because workers simply want to work in office and work from home. They want that flexibility. In terms of data analysis, it's going to be conducting in-depth, semi-structured one-on-one interviews based on COVID restrictions. If they're in place by the time I'm conducting the study, I'll be using Zoom and I'll be recording, through Zoom, but also backing it up with some other tools, and having all of the interviews transcribed, and really looking at developing and throughout the entire process detailed research notes and memos throughout the entire process. And I'm already started a comprehensive literature review, and that's certainly, I see that continuing because it's exciting to see that more and more studies are being released. So I want to make sure that we're capturing all the content and all of the opportunities for really understanding what new knowledge is being published at the time. Participants, as I said, it's going to be female leaders in North America. And I think and like I said, it's really important that it's going to be organizations that are publicly committed to transitioning to hybrid, because I believe that companies that have committed to it, they will have an operating model by this time, certainly based on some of what I'm reading now, that will be in place, and they will have already had at least a year or two under their belt through, really implementing that model. So I think that there's a lot to learn from that. Social change implications is really exciting because, as I said before, I had already been studying gender equality in the workplace on my own, and really trying to understand what the barriers are, and really the needs for creating this change. And what is it that organizations are not doing in order to really close that gap? And so I think any new knowledge that's going to come out from this study to understand the barriers, the opportunities for growth, it's all going to contribute to new knowledge that can help to support ESG goals, which is environmental, social, and governance goals that a lot of publicly traded companies have to report on now. And it's also going to help the female leaders that are in place now, and the new generation of female leaders that are going to be now adapting to this hybrid model. And how does it that they, what should they know about advancing their careers in this new structure? And ultimately, it really is going to have a strong economic, impact, because certainly any leaders learning how to thrive is going to help benefit the organization, which overall is going to have a strong economic development throughout the community, positive perspective. So there's so many opportunities for social change in this area. We'll go to the next slide. And so, I'd like to just maybe close on the for me, this is really exciting because I feel like this is really going to become the new normal, and we're at in a critical stage where the change and the research is being conducted at the same time that so much change is happening and taking place. So there's a lot that we can learn right now, and certainly through this study, that will be able to help inform the future of work, and what that looks like, and ensuring that nobody is left behind. So that, if anybody has any questions.
Thank you, Jennifer. That was wonderful. Yes, so if anyone does have any questions or comments, please use the chat. We do have a few minutes left here today, so I know Jennifer would love to hear from you all. And alternatively, if you'd rather unmute yourself and ask a question, that's fine too. And while we're waiting for folks to do that, one question, and maybe you kind of touched on this a little bit in the beginning, Jennifer, but I'm always curious to learn what prompted someone to go into this particular line of research. And so would you mind sharing a little bit more about why you moved in this direction?
Yeah, sure. So I've always led teams, and I was initially in venture capital, where there's very few women, and then later in government and economic development. And I always saw that there was certain things that were supports and different growth opportunities that I would question why female leaders aren't going for. And I would see, I would always question, why is it that there's this gender gap that exists? And it was something that for me was always dear to my heart, because I always I really worked in an environment where it was very male dominated. And so it was just something that was so passionate for me. And so as I started doing more research and then on my own, and then not in a structured academic way, it was, and as I was, it was really the book, reading the book from, that talks about Through the Labyrinth, and the idea that there's certain barriers and opportunities. I was able to really dive into it a little bit more, and I ended up starting a company called Women Leadership Nation, where went into organizations and helped to close the gender gap, and re-identified 12 building blocks for, why we're not making progress. And so, as I started speaking about that, and certainly obtaining a PhD is always something that was my dream, I thought it was a perfect alignment. And it just so happened that I was doing my PhD at the same time as hybrid workplace, and COVID hit. And for me, it was, also operating structures is something that's so interesting. And I really think this is going to create a great opportunity where, there's going to be so much more flexibility and potential for female leaders to advance and have their career, but also have and be able to balance their work life and family as well. So it's something that's always been of interest.
Yeah, absolutely. Completely agree. Thanks for sharing that. Well, it doesn't look like we have any other questions, so we'll go ahead and wrap up for today. But I do want to thank you, Jennifer, for sharing your presentation and the work that you've put into this, and send you lots of encouragement and good vibes as you continue on this journey and work through this process.
Thank you so much.
For attending, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you so much.